So we are here with the story that introduces and ends the character of Abraxas. So Abraxas is one of the most powerful beings ever in the history of Marvel Comics, and in this video we're going to find out why. So what this does here is this initially picks up with a handful of characters. You've got a character by the name of Marvel Girl, Valeria Richards. We'll talk about her here in a minute, because anybody who knows anything about Marvel Comics in this point in time is just kind of like, oh god. Then we also have Frankie Raye. She is a Herald of Galactus, but this one's different. Then you've got the other members of the Fantastic Four, along with Franklin Richards, who will be incredibly important towards the end of this story. But what's going on here is Reed is tracking what he refers to as an anomaly, which is in effect the head of Galactus from an alternate reality. Now we know this because Nova chimes in, and Nova even says she's from a different universe, that what had happened is that following the death of Galactus in the main Marvel universe, that Abraxas basically just started showing up and killing all these different versions of Galactus. Now we'll learn more about the relationship between Abraxas and Galactus in this video, but in effect, when Abraxas had killed her version of Galactus, she had ended up here in the main Marvel universe. It wasn't explicitly explained why, although we will find out. And in effect, she's the one that informs the Fantastic Four of the nature of Abraxas and the danger that he poses. Now for Franklin Richards, he talks about how he sees Abraxas in his dreams, but he only ever really knows him as the Dark Man. Now what it does here is it switches over to the Silver Surfer, who's basically arriving alongside the new Captain Marvel, as well as like Moondragon, the daughter of Drax the Destroyer, also known as Heather Douglas, Quasar, Wendell Vaughn. And what Reed does is he kind of explains what's been going on behind the scenes. And what he does here is he says that like this head of Galactus has basically been transported to where the Fantastic Four are at, or at least where everybody's meeting. And what he does here is he explains the head of Galactus has been transported here to the blue area of the moon, the oxygen-rich area of the moon. And the reason why the head is here is because of the fact that once all these weird things started happening, you suddenly started having other characters from different realities popping up in the main Marvel universe. Of course, Reed had also gone to visit Uatu the Watcher, hoping he would have some kind of guidance on what was going on, but Uatu the Watcher had basically gone insane. He didn't know who he was and then fell into a catatonic state. So whatever it is that's happening here with regards to Abraxas is basically something astronomical that people just can't necessarily fathom. And so following that, Reed Richards traveled to an alternate reality to meet with a guy named Dr. Druid, who's probably one of the least important characters that you're ever going to hear about in your entire life. But what was revealed to them in meeting with Eternity is that what Frankie Raye had explained was accurate, that Abraxas is a being who has basically been unleashed on the multiverse and is traveling across every single universe, killing every version of Galactus he can find, but is also on the hunt for something called the Ultimate Nullifier. Now, the Ultimate Nullifier is one of the most powerful artifacts, and arguably the most powerful artifact in the entirety of Marvel Comics. It's beyond the Infinity Gauntlet, cosmic cubes, the whole 9 yards. The idea behind the Ultimate Nullifier is that if a person has enough fortitude, when they point the Ultimate Nullifier at an object, when they pull the trigger, it'll basically wipe that object from existence. Not only will it be wiped from existence, it'll be like it never existed. And what Abraxas is trying to do is literally wipe out the entirety of the multiverse using the Ultimate Nullifier. And if he's able to get his hands on it, he can do it because he's a multiversal cosmic entity that basically just represents absolute destruction. And so what ends up happening is that in the midst of this, when all these different really like bogeys, if you want to call them that, right, these anomalies are heading towards the blue area of the moon, that you end up having the Fantastic Four who scramble and respond along with everybody else. Now there's kind of a mist, right, that's like permeating this blue area, only for Silver Surfer to be caught in it and to be annihilated, right? He's literally destroyed, disintegrated, completely wiped out. When it comes to these like monstrous forces, the Fantastic Four can only do so much. They are immensely powerful. And that's when one of these guys references Johnny Storm as the person they need to go after, the person they need to attack. Now, for the most part, the Fantastic Four are able to hold their own. They ultimately end up defeating these forces, and it's really more by way of like Captain Marvel and Wendell Vaughn and Quasar that they even pull it off in the first place. But then a kind of apparition of like Abraxas appears and kind of taunts them for a minute and then basically disappears. But what ends up happening is Heather Douglas picks up on the fact suspect that one of these guys basically said that like Johnny Storm's a person we have to go after. When that happened, she scanned his mind, and what she realized is that the Watcher had taken the location of the Ultimate Nullifier and placed it somewhere in the multiverse. And then he took the location of the Ultimate Nullifier and put it in the mind of Johnny Storm, so it could only be accessed by Johnny Storm. Nobody knows where the Ultimate Nullifier is in one of these three locations. They don't even know if it's split into three pieces, and each of these three pieces are put into these three locations. But what ends up happening in response to that is the Fantastic Four do the only thing they can do, which is jump into the multiverse and try to find these different shards or pieces of the Ultimate Nullifier. Now, of course, what's kind of bonkers about this is that when it comes to Abraxas, he's everywhere and nowhere at the same time. A perfect example of this is he basically manifests as a physical statue that basically gets up, turns into his physical form, and then just kind of looks over the moon and sort of muses to himself, right? Vini Vini Vici. So it's one of those cool elements where like this guy is everywhere and nowhere at the same time. He's like the agents from the Matrix. But while you have these different alternate realities that are almost kind of converging into the main Marvel universe itself, so you kind of have like the Avengers and the X-Men sort of responding where they can, when they can, the meat and potatoes of this is that in the midst of all of this, Marvel Girl Valeria ends up realizing that Abraxas is coming to her location. And what she does is something called time dancing, where she can basically jump through the time stream or from one reality to the next and basically flees. Now, the reason why she does this, even with Abraxas following her, where he jumps to a location that she can't get to, is because Valeria Richards, at least this version of her character, is not native to this universe. So, see if you can wrap your head around this crazy malarkey. So the whole basis behind this story is to retcon Valeria Richards. That's the whole basis behind it. That's it. It's to retcon her character and give her a cohesive origin. The way this played out in Marvel Comics, as insane as this sounds, is that Valeria was supposed to be the second child of Reed and Susan. What ended up happening is that Franklin Richards, due to the either difficulty of the birth or him being jealous of her having a second kid, it's not overly explained, and in some ways it really depends on what Marvel fan you're talking to, he effectively whisked her away to an alternate reality, and she was raised by that reality's version of Susan Storm and Doctor Doom. Why? Because that version of Doctor Doom was a good guy, Reed Richards had died in that alternate reality, and Valeria was just raised by them to become a hero. She ultimately ended up time dancing, ended up in the main Marvel universe, and has effectively been here for quite some time. But of course, the retcon, right, the change to her character's history that Marvel's going to give us will actually come later in this story. We'll talk about that, once we cross that bridge. But for Johnny Storm and Frankie Ray, the two of them partnering up is because Frankie Ray in the main Marvel universe was at one point a love interest of Johnny Storm. And while these two are not love interests because they're from two different realities, they know enough about each other's powers, their strengths and weaknesses to work together. But there's actually another caveat behind this, which is kind of cool. Now, for the other members of the Fantastic Four, Susan Storm, for example, she's sent into an alternate reality where in that universe she became a doctor, but like they don't really do anything meaningful or important, right? It's just one of these things where it's like, imagine what she would look like in a different universe, right? There's one reality where she married Namor the Submariner as an example, or something along those lines. But the important thing here, kind of again, focusing on the main brunt behind this, Franklin Richards was actually whisked away and sent to Roma in order to basically keep him safe, or at least to allow him some measure to recoup and to effectively figure out a way to win, along with Valeria, who effectively time danced there. Now, who is the character of Roma? Roma is actually one of the coolest characters in Marvel Comics, and she's not overly powerful. She is, but she's not, but she's really, really interesting. So a lot of you guys already know about the multiverse, right? Like a infinite number of universes all coexisting at the same time. What you have here is something called Otherworld, and you even have like the Citadel of Merlin. Merlin is basically like the same Merlin of Arthurian legend. His daughter is Roma. Merlin's long since been dead, but she's kind of like the multiversal guardian. She keeps an eye on things. She hasn't really been seen or heard from in Marvel Comics for quite some time because she was killed, although there's no reason to believe that she can't simply just return. But something to understand is the relationship between her and Franklin is very close. And all of that really comes out of the end of the Onslaught saga in the 1990s, which is to say basically the deaths of all the superheroes except for like the Fantastic Four, the X-Men, and Spider-Man, and Franklin Richards resurrecting them all from the dead and putting them in an alternate reality called Heroes Reborn. So it was kind of cool. It was technically the second version of Counter-Earth in Marvel Comics, but the important thing here is that them being under the protection of Roma almost kind of places them outside of the multiverse. So the expectation is that if Abraxas is the living embodiment of just destruction on a multiversal level, he shouldn't necessarily be able to access them. But her concern here is that if Franklin and Valeria and those guys are not able to find a way to defeat Abraxas, he will get the ultimate nullifier, and it will lead to the destruction of everything. And so what she does is, in addition to Franklin and Valeria, she brings in Saturnine. Now, why Saturnine's here, I'm not entirely sure. Maybe she's just here for the heck of it. Saturnine is the head of what's called the Omniversal Development Court. Her job is to basically monitor every universe across the multiverse and make sure that, like, the Avengers come into existence around the same time, the X-Men come into existence, so on and so forth. Sometimes that happens like it's supposed to, sometimes it doesn't because of guys like Mad Jim Jaspers, but she seems to be here as more of just like, why not throw her in, right? It's just one of those interesting elements. But their job here is to really kind of monitor, watch how things unfold, and then only at the proper time will Franklin Richards intervene. Now, a lot of you guys are probably asking yourself, if Franklin's so powerful that he can like alter reality on a universal scale, and his ability to do this is presumably universal across any and all universes, right? You throw him in an alternate reality and he can alter the very fabric of the universe itself in that alternate reality. Why not just send him in? And a lot of this is because Roma is one of those very cloak and dagger characters. She's one of those characters Marvel brings in when like they want to tell a story, but they don't want to take like the easy way out. So it's like Roma has a plan and we just have to wait until the plan manifests to see what happens. And that's basically it. Not the best explanation there ever was, but Marvel is very hand wavy when it comes to the plans of Roma and how those things unfold. And so what you end up doing here is you pick up with what's called the crossroad of all reality, which is to say, essentially a nexus. And that what goes on here is the location of the ultimate nullifier is discovered, and Johnny Storm, of course, gets his hands on it, and then in turn is like, okay, let's grab this thing and get out of here, only for Frankie Ray to turn on him. And what had actually happened is that, yes, Abraxas had shown up to Nova's reality and killed that version of Galactus, but instead of Frankie Ray just like fleeing that universe and showing up in the main Marvel universe and asking for aid, she actually became a herald of Abraxas. She was effectively his spy, operating within the main Marvel universe. And that what she'd been doing here was just biding her time, waiting for the moment when the ultimate nullifier is found, and then capture it and hand it over to Abraxas. And that's exactly what happens. That in fact, when this takes place, that Nova shows up to the realm of Roma, and then in turn, that gives Abraxas a gateway, right? She basically becomes a beacon, and it's like, over there, and like he just goes running over to that location and then kills Roma on the spot, like just annihilates her, and then in turn goes to seize the ultimate nullifier for himself. Now the kicker to this is that before he can take possession of it, Reed Richards is able to pick up on the fact that Johnny Storm has the nullifier and then whisks everybody back to the main Marvel universe. The problem is that even when they're brought back to Earth itself, Frankie Ray is still standing like right there, like right next to Abraxas, and so Abraxas just takes the nullifier from her. But you get this really cool moment where he says, like, now with the ultimate nullifier in my grasp, there isn't a soul in the combined universes who can stop me, not a single one. And Franklin Richards is listening to that whole conversation unfold. Not only that, what seems to have been happening here is that as Abraxas was going through and killing these different iterations of Galactus, not only that, Frankie Ray herself basically creates what are called her kind of angels, right? Like essentially duplicates of herself. Now, what's really cool here, and it's one of these things where it can kind of go either way depending on how you're approaching it, you could take the argument that these different versions of Nova are basically just Frankie Ray duplicating herself, given her ability to manipulate the power cosmic, along with what are likely some adjustments from Abraxas in terms of her powers being modified. You could also look at it from the perspective that like they were all different heralds of Galactus from across the multiverse. We're not really given a definitive answer. All we're told here is, Nova, my trusted herald, be a lamb, take your angels and destroy the Fantastic Four. And she simply says, love to. So it really seems to be the first where she just basically duplicated herself. But as for why she even betrayed or really sided with Abraxas in the first place, this is rooted in the fact that what she says is that in her reality, Galactus showed up to Earth in order to consume it, much in the same way he showed up to Zenla and Nornrad offered himself to become the Silver Surfer. The difference here is that Frankie Ray was quote unquote chosen, although really more offered by that reality's version of Reed, to become the Herald of Galactus in order to spare Earth. But even when that was done, he destroyed Earth anyway. So with that kind of anger and vengeance really operating as her very inner being, that in turn led her to basically join Abraxas. Now, one of the funny things about this is that even despite the efforts of everybody involved, which even includes these other characters from alternate realities who realize the danger of Abraxas and just kind of jumping into the fray and trying to help defeat the different versions of Nova, none of them can stand against Abraxas. None of them can actually defeat this guy. And so at the end of the day, it really all comes down to the power of Franklin Richards. Because what ends up happening here is that Franklin, he tells his mom, I have to be brave. I have to do good like mom and dad taught me. I have to make it so everything is all right. Grab my hand, Valerie. And then in turn, using the three of them, that's where you get the retcon, right? That's where you get the great big huge change. That what ends up happening here is that Valeria herself is basically quote unquote destroyed. And in turn, it doesn't come into a later comic, but she's deposited in the womb of Susan Storm in order to be reborn. So the way her character's history works, right? And this is like Valeria Richards as you see her now in 2023 at the time we're making this video in Marvel Comics. The way this history works is that she was basically the second child of Reed and Susan in the main Marvel universe. She was whisked away to an alternate reality by Franklin Richards, raised to become Marvel Girl in that alternate reality. She showed up in the main Marvel universe, and then based on this story, she is sent back into the womb of Susan Storm so she can be reborn in this universe as the actual second child of Reed and Susan. Is it necessary? Absolutely not. It's the most ridiculous retcon ever in the history of Marvel Comics, and it's just overly complex and kind of stupid. But nonetheless, it would have been a lot easier for a character to just die, and then like Susan gets knocked up by Reed again, and she's like, let's just name this child Valeria after like that alternate reality version of our daughter that we met, and just call it a day. But I thought that was worth mentioning. The kicker here though is that with Franklin's powers and given what he's capable of, remember, Franklin can alter reality on a universal scale. What he does is he kind of quote unquote wishes on a star, which is kind of a weird little moment here. Now, what ends up happening here is really kind of wonky and is kind of hand wavy, but is also a testament to the level of power that Franklin Richards has. That the way in which he uses his powers is that he literally sees a star in the sky. And so following this, what you get is Franklin Richards using his powers in probably one of the most popular ways that people talk about whenever they talk about Franklin, that Valeria is still here because this alternate reality of Valeria is intact. I mean, if you really want to look at it at a weird way, Franklin basically made sure that his mom got knocked up and will essentially give birth to like a second child. It's one of those weird things. But with this alternate reality version of Valeria there alongside Franklin, what they end up doing is combining their powers. Franklin, quote unquote, wishes on a star. Quite literally, he sees a star in the sky and then he wishes for things to essentially go back to normal. And effectively, eternity and infinity manifest, and then Galactus is reborn and resurrected from the dead, right? He simply just appears. I am that I am. Now, the funny thing here is that Abraxas takes no concern and doesn't even care. And it's just kind of like, it doesn't matter to me, right? I have the ultimate nullifier. But one of the things to remember is that back in the original Galactus trilogy in Marvel Comics, it was established that the nullifier was created by Galactus. So he controls it as much as anybody else possibly could, and really more so than anybody could. And then once Frankie Ray attacks Galactus, he pulls the ultimate nullifier from Abraxas directly, and then when Frankie Ray launches an attack against Galactus at the behest of Abraxas, the ultimate nullifier simply falls out of his hands, and Reed Richards picks it up. And when he does, he fires the nullifier at Abraxas, and then all of reality kind of shatters, disappears, and then restructures itself. This is like a massive retcon. Like reality basically blinked out for a second and came back. And when it did, everybody who was basically dead before ended up returning, which includes the Silver Surfer. Galactus is back to his normal self, Valeria Richards from the alternate reality is gone, and Susan Storm is pregnant with what's going to be the Valeria Richards that you guys are all aware of in Marvel Comics. Again, the whole reason the story was written was to retcon the character of Valeria, but it is cool to see Abraxas. With that being said, guys, we're going to bring this to an end. Thank you all for watching, and I will catch you all later. Peace.